There is, let us say, knowledge of various kinds that we have. And on the other side, we have behavior. Sometimes knowledge and behavior leads to behavior. Sometimes behavior leads to knowledge. Sometimes there is a break between knowledge and behavior. When there is a break between knowledge and behavior, one of the terms that is used is learning doing gap, for example. What cognition does is that it is the link between knowledge and behavior. Cognition is what you can call structural knowledge. Inside the human mind. Cognition, for example, might reveal itself in the form of what people call mental models. They reveal itself in the form of the axioms that you hold in your thinking, assumptions. Cognition also means that when you, for example, recognize something, there is cognition there. There you are taking some knowledge which you already have. You are taking some behavior or some sense perception on the outside world. And then you are matching the two and saying that therefore you are concluding at the end of it that this is what I mean by it. So when I am trying to recognize something, there is cognition there. Similarly, there is a mass of information in front of us and it forms into some kind of a picture or a whole or some form of a pattern that somehow suddenly is starting to mean something to us. Then that becomes sense making. So sense making again is a cognitive function. When I look at learning from this perspective of behavior and sense making, etc., then that learning is in the form of memory, in the form of acquisition of information. When I see learning from the point of view of knowledge, then that learning is in the form of conceptual understanding of some things, etc. But when I see learning from the point of view of cognition, then that learning has a totally different meaning because it is both personal and impersonal. It ties up the knowledge that may be inside us or the knowledge that we have, the behavior that is being done, the actions or the sense-making unit, all this together gets tied up. So in that sense, cognition is sitting in a special place. It is sitting in the space which allows you to be able to take information, take knowledge, take all these things and to bring out of it some broad choices, decisions, recognitions, new axioms, new conclusions about the way the world works. All of this sits in the realm of cognition. What this does is that this cognition then drives behavior. If I have concluded something, then I behave according to that conclusion. If I have an axiom, then that starts shaping my thinking. And not only that, if I have made sense in a particular way, or if I have a mental model that sees the world in a particular way, it also filters information accordingly. It throws out information which is irrelevant and only allows information to come in which sometimes fits into my mental models. So cognition is very powerful because it drives. Once it sets into place, it drives. Thinking, it drives action, it drives everything. This cognition operates at several levels. Cognition, the deepest forms of cognition are where we draw, for example, the structure of our identity. Who am I? What do I stand for? All that is also cognition, because it is structural knowledge which is sitting inside you. Similarly, the mental models that we carry about the world, the axioms that we carry about the world. People are good, people are not good, people are trustworthy, people are not trustworthy. If I give, then people will take and no one will give back. If I give, people will give back. They are all axioms and structures and causal relationships which we have established as true sitting inside our head. Who decides it's true? We ourselves. So it is our cognition. We have cognized the word thus. So identities, mental models, recognition structures, ways of looking at and organizing information, the world around us, all this is all sitting at several levels here. You can see that the most effective and sustainable form of learning takes place when there is cognitive learning, correct? Because it will shape or reshape your mind and it will remain there in your mind for a period of time. So cognitive learning in that sense, it has sustenance and it has some form of permanence. Now that is both an extremely good thing and extremely bad thing. How is it good? Because once I have set something to be true, it drives my actions, so it allows me to be free then to deal with the information in the world around us. But the bad news is that next time new information comes contrary to it, the same cognition says, you can't come in that information. So things continue as they are. So cognition also prevents learning. So cognition has the power also to prevent me from evolving or from learning or from appreciating things differently, because I have already cognized the world in one particular way. And because of that, it has many implications. The normal methods of learning also fail then, because information acquisition, etc., assume that there is already an architecture of thought to support it. But if the very architecture of thought is going to block that new information from coming in, is going to block that information from coming in, then that learning will not take place, correct? And therefore, then the mind becomes, in that sense, locked into a pattern of thought and it is preventing learning. It is like the mind is blocking out any way to change it at this level. So cognition is both good and bad. It is good because it is so functionally powerful, useful, valuable, and it is bad because it can also be permanent, and it is also good because it's permanent knowledge, but it's also bad because it's permanent knowledge, or it's sustaining knowledge, or it has a sense of permanency to it. It's not permanent quite, but it is long-term knowledge. This is also, by the way, the problem of mindset change. Because mindsets represent in that sense the structure of the cognition that are now preventing further learning and which are perpetuating existing patterns of thought. So this is the meaning and the exploration of the word cognition. Now let us understand the second word in the whole thing, empowerment. What does the word empowerment means? Empowerment means I have power to act, to do, to bring about some change, to do whatever. And when I say I am disempowered, it means I do not have power. Now, there are two kinds of power. And there are two kinds of powerlessness. So one is where I am empowered or disempowered by the world around us. So for example, if a person is put in a cage or is put in a physical cage or put in a physical jail and locked up, then that person doesn't have the power to move around. So he has been physically disempowered. Or if two people come and there is a person who comes in and he is acting violent, so two people pin him down and hold him down and he cannot move, then he is being disempowered physically. But what does it mean to be disempowered mentally? Or what does it mean to be disempowered psychologically? For example, if I speak and I believe or I am told that I am worthless or my ideas are not worthwhile and not worth hearing, then I am disempowered psychologically, correct? Then next time, before I have spoken, I feel I am already in a psychological cage which says that that my words are worthless, my ideas are worthless, I am worthless. So there is both empowerment and disempowerment at a physical level, and there is empowerment and disempowerment at a mental or at a psychological level. If you look at empowerment or disempowerment at a psychological level, that's too vague a word. So let us now make it a little more precise and say, what does empowerment and disempowerment mean at a cognitive level? So what it means is that I might have some patterns of thought, some structures of thought which are fundamentally disempowering. For example, I believe that I am a victim of my circumstances. That's a disempowerment thought. It says others are responsible for the ills in which I am living. That is a thought which now renders me incapable of action, because I have started out already believing that if others are responsible and others are not going to allow anything to happen, then any action I do anyway is worthless and valueless. So I have begun already with the belief that my actions are worthless, then there will be no energy in my actions, correct? It is not a question of competence, it's a question of having the energy to act. I do not have the energy to act, I do not have the conviction to act, I do not have the intention to act, because I have already begun with a belief that my actions, for example, are not worthwhile. Let me give you a simple example. If I believe that even if I study for the exam, I am not going to do well, I am going to do badly come what may, then I am psychologically now rendered disempowered to study, or cognitively disempowered to study. We have concluded that irrespective of what I do, I am not going to get marks. Therefore, it stands to reason that I will then, between studying and not studying, I will decide not to study because it is anyway not worthwhile studying. Anyway, I am not going to get marks. So what am I doing? Wasting my time, correct? To an outsider who does not see this cognitive state, it appears to be something which is very vague, that this person is not studying even though if he studied he would get marks. But to this person who is sitting inside, it's a perfectly logical situation where he says that anyway if I study nothing is going to happen, so why should I study? Both are reasonable, but the assumptions are different. The axioms are different. The person outside's axiom is looking at it from the axiom that if there is effort, there will be results. Well, this person is starting with the axiom that even if there is effort, there is no result, so it's worth doing nothing. So you can see that the structures of our thought, the axioms of our thinking can disempower us or render us incapable of action, not for perfectly logical reasons, because I believe that anyway many things if I do or don't do, it will lead to certain outcomes and not others. And if these are permanent, now we've already discussed that these cognitive patterns can be a little more permanent or a little more, they can persist. Let me not use the word permanent, but they are persistent. And if they are persistent, that means even if there is information or even if there is evidence to the contrary, because these patterns of thought are persistent, they will block out that new information and continue with the older patterns of thought and say, no, this is what is true. So those negative persistent patterns of thought are also preventing further learning on the subject. So for example, if tomorrow the same person who has the axiom that even if I study nothing will happen, if they got good marks or got better marks than otherwise with a little bit of study, the same person would attribute those marks not to his or her own effort, but to the fact that the paper was easy or there were other external circumstances why that is. So even when they have to take credit for their own action, they would not take it, and they would assume that the credit goes elsewhere, because they say, anyway, it does not match with my basic belief that there is no correlation between effort and outcome. Now, is this something which is very unusual or vague? The answer is no. You take organizations, you take institutions all over the world. There are many individuals who have all kinds of axioms about how things work. For example, you have individuals who might stand up and say that it doesn't matter, I am a non-entity in this organization, and anyway what my opinions don't matter, my contributions don't matter, because it's a large monolithic setup where anyway there are millions of people working, so whether I do or I don't do, whether I contribute or I not contribute, it really doesn't matter, because the organization will go on as it is, and my input for that matter is completely not relevant to the destiny of the organization. If that is my axiom, then would I contribute? Why would I? I would say anyway it doesn't matter. So even if I might be loyal to my organization, and that's the beautiful thing here, I might be loyal to my organization, I might say that I am interested in the welfare of the organization, but yet I might not contribute simply because I don't believe my contribution is going to make a difference. I am loyal for altogether different reasons, but it has nothing, but my work, I know that I am not going to make any difference, so let me just watch on. We do that with our country, for example. We say that yes, country, I am loyal to India, I believe that I love India, I want India to do well, but my actions anyway have no relationship to India, because I am anyway 1 out of 1.2 or whatever billion people, and my actions are completely irrelevant. So how does it matter if I behave what I do? So you can see these actions in the world around. So what you might ask yourself, why aren't they acting in a particular way? That is because there are axioms of thought which are transforming, which is making them behave in what in their mind is perfectly logical, but which in the minds of at a collective level or outsiders, it is a perfectly illogical idea. Look at India as a country. For several hundred years, it has operated with the notion, and perhaps with the physical reality also, of being enslaved in several ways. But the physical enslavement can result in a mental enslavement. So it is possible that we may have become independent 60 years ago or 75 years ago. But that independence, which is physical, may not have resulted in cognitive independence. Independence of thought, independence of our own axioms of thinking, independence of our own vision of life, which is not shaped by the Western world or not shaped by by existing patterns, or not shaped by people who we believe are more in a position to tell Indians what to do than who we are. So this kind of cognitive independence may be taking a little longer than physical independence. In fact, the task before the nation is cognitive independence now. Independence in science, independence in our methods of education, cognitive independence in our own vision for ourselves as a nation and what we stand for, our own sense of destiny. We have to be free of existing axioms, and we have to revisit every fundamental axiom of who we are, and then ask ourselves whether those axioms, what is the appropriate axiom that we want to take up. In other words, and which are those axioms which are disabling to us, and can we replace them with enabling axioms about who we are? Are we the creators of a new India, or are we simply victims of circumstances? Are we, for example, people who have to see ourselves as citizens who are building a whole country, or do we see ourselves as simply people who are citizens, political citizens of India, but who may, for example, be feeding off the country at one level? or we need to escape to better lands in order to be, in order to find a better future because this country cannot give us what we want. Or maybe we are people who are participants in this country but who are sitting there and saying that we may be political participants, etc. But the truth of the matter is that it is they out there who are, for example, responsible for the ills. That they being a politician, or the they being the government, or the they being, public servants around. It could be they, could be anybody. All these are all the conditions in which we live. So for us, cognitive independence at a societal or a country level obviously means a new sense of destiny invented by ourselves for ourselves. A vision for India invented by Indians for themselves. A vision of science that affirms and that leverages, for example, our 5,000 years culture and then builds from there. A vision of technology that looks at our needs, looks at our society's problems and then builds from there. All this is cognitive independence at a national level. If you go to institutions within this country, cognitive independence means trying to have, say for example, organizations, institutions which are willing to take pride in excellence. Institutions which are willing to say that, when there are 1,000 people or 10,000 people working in an organization, and if every one of them is contributing positively to the welfare of the organization and for the welfare of that society, then again there is a form of cognitive independence. And that is the effect or the value of cognitive independence that we can have. If we had cognitive independence, cognitive strength, cognitive empowerment in our organizations, then they would actually unleash the power of their people. They could unleash the power of the organization to transform society. Whether our banks, just imagine so many banks with more than 1 lakh branches in the country. What can they do in terms of unleashing the power of these banks in various parts of this country? You take government organizations, there are so many infrastructures set up. Every one of them has the power to transform the society around. Then the root of that transformation is cognitive empowerment. The belief, not competence. Competence is adequate. Maybe more is needed and maybe skill development can continue. But the real problem is cognitive empowerment. The willingness to say that I will make a difference. I can change things. I am not a victim. And that if I contribute, this is how the effect is. To widening my identity to include others. All this is cognitive empowerment. So the goal ahead is cognitive empowerment, because that cognitive empowerment will empower institutions and empower the country. Thus far, we have assumed that empowerment had to come from resources. We are a poor country, so we need money. If you go to organizations, first they will say, we need funding, we need resources. For every problem, people say we need resources. But is the problem resources or is the problem human beings? And within human beings, is the problem simply quantity of human beings? Or is the problem whether they are competent or not? Or is the problem whether they are willing to stand up and to make a difference? If the problem is there, then that is the change that has to be brought about everywhere. So this is the meaning of cognitive empowerment. This is the impact of cognitive empowerment.